Yakuza 0 is a time machine to the bubble-era economy of Japan in the 1980s, complete with telephone clubs, neon nightlife, and smooth city pop. And as someone living in Japan, because believe me or not, this Chinese spot over there is Osaka Castle, playing this game felt really exciting. It was my introduction to the Yakuza series, or Ryuga Gotoku in Japan, and it perfectly mixes the intense drama with the absurd humor that defines this game. Although I would describe it as nearly flawless, it does stumble in a few places. In this video I'll show you why Yakuza 0 isn't just a game. It's an unforgettable experience with an atmosphere, a style, and an amount of content that few games can match. Okay, so the first thing that I want to mention is that Yakuza 0 partly happens in the city where I live at, which is Osaka, and also Tokyo. But I was more interested in Osaka because I'm very familiar with the city now, and it's not called the same, it's called Sotenburi instead of like Dotonburi, but essentially speaking, they've tried to recreate it as faithfully as possible. So they had to change a few things, obviously. The iconic dude on the building called the Running Man is not the Running Man anymore, but it's Beer Man. And I would argue that if you had to change that guy, this is probably one of the best way to go about it. Is he called Beer Man or Muscle Man? Because they have both on the sign. Maybe both? Is the Muscle Beer Man? You also have that restaurant with a huge crab on it, and it's really recognizable. Yakuza 0 happens in the 80s, but that restaurant is still here and rocking, you know? Doesn't seem like it's gonna disappear anytime soon. Hey, so I didn't want to give unverified information on my channel, so I actually came to check by myself if the crab restaurant is still here. And it is still here, obviously. It's in front of a Starbucks now. I never come here, by the way. This is a tourist trap. Anyway, back to the video. Leave me alone, bro. What do you want? That's right. Okay. The crab restaurant is... Okay, just give me 1 second. Yes, what is it for? Okay. Alright. Crab restaurant is right here. Very different from the one we can see today, actually. Also, I think the location is a little bit different. Like in real life, this restaurant is on the other side of the river, I think. It's like here. And you'll also notice this is not a Starbucks. This is a hostess club. Also, if you keep walking down that street, if this was real life, there would be a kurasushi. Like somewhere here. But this is the 80s, so I don't think kurasushi exists yet. I'm not as familiar with Kabukicho, but I hear that Kamurocho, their recreation of Kabukicho, is also pretty loyal to the actual place. I should mention that this is obviously my first Yakuza game, so I was going in there completely blind. I didn't really know anything about the series apart from a few, you know, things that I've seen online. It's kind of like a very serious story, but sometimes it goes into funny stuff with like karaoke sessions and whatnot, right? But this is basically the extent of what I knew about the series. And as a first Yakuza game, my initial feelings about Yakuza 0 were kind of negative because the gameplay felt really clunky. I couldn't really get a sense of how the fights worked, and I don't know, it was really different from what I expected. But as I will explain, all of those feelings went away pretty quickly. Something that didn't go away, however, is the freaking loading screens that happens every time you enter a building. It doesn't matter if you go inside of a company or if you go inside of a restaurant. As long as you leave the main stage of the game, there's going to be a loading screen on your way in and on your way out. I could never get used to this until the end of the game. That was a hard pill to swallow as someone who's been, you know, pretty used to open world games at this point. I feel like for the past 10 years, we've been spoiled with like a lot of huge open world games that don't subject you to any sort of loading screen for hours. So when you go into Yakuza 0 expecting sort of like the same experience, it's a little bit, how to say? It's a little bit frustrating to have to go back to this sort of like ancient loading screen based exploration. Another thing that I should mention is that now there's a director's cut version of the game, which came out slightly after I started playing the game, unfortunately, so I should have waited. But the only thing that I know is that they have more cutscenes toward the end or whatever. I don't think the loading screens or anything else has changed. Like it's not a remake at all. It's just like some sort of like enhanced edition. All right, so first thing, let me hit you guys with some development facts because I actually did my research. I know that the development team went drinking in the Tokyo red light districts as research for world building, and it's probably one of the best ways to do it because you're deep into the Yakuza sort of like lifestyle if you go drinking there. I know that the localization of the game took around 1.5 years because they had to translate 1.8 million Japanese characters, which is, you know, a pretty significant numbers. We are on par with the Kiseki games at this point, and they are known to be, you know, very story heavy. So props to the translators. They did a pretty good job. The localization team notably had to translate 38 pages of Mahjong guide, which probably is a pretty significant portion of those 1.8 million characters, but that shows the dedication that they had, right? Now, unfortunately, I didn't end up playing the Mahjong minigame that much, but that's another story. The game scored 85 out of 100 on Metacritic, which is very good, obviously, but the biggest takeaway is that Yakuza 0 became the best-selling game in the franchise, which makes the game the perfect entry point for newcomers like me. This is also very Japanese, by the way, to have a French name for like a fancy shop. And le marché just means the market, but I'm not saying they understand what the word they're using, but it is something they do pretty often. Alright, let's switch to the world and environment of Yakuza 0. I can tell you this because I live in Japan, and I have been living in Japan for a pretty good number of years, but the game really feels like Japan, you know? It's a really, really faithful recreation of what living in Japan feels like, down to the way the NPCs behave, up to the signs you see on the streets, and, you know, basically everything else. Like the atmosphere is perfect. It's exactly what it feels like to live here. I was constantly in awe at the amount of effort that they went through to recreate that sort of experience up until the end of the game. That feeling just never faded away. The game mainly happens in two locations. You have Kamurocho, which is basically Kabukicho in Tokyo, and you have Sotenbori, which is basically Dotonbori in Osaka. It is set during the peak of the bubble economy between December 1988 and January 1989. And I really love this era of Japan because I first fell in love with the culture by experiencing those mangas and animes from the 80s and 90s, like Yu Yu Hakusho or Dragon Ball or Ranma 1.5. I don't know how you say that in English. Jankara was a thing in the 80s? There's no way, right? Those were probably real movies from the 80s. Space Alliance 2. Space Aliens 2? Is that a thing? Miracle Travel Story 3. Miracle Travel Story 3. The game features these places called Terekura, which is the short for telephone clubs, and they're part of the broader Fuzoku, sort of like industry landscape in Japan. And if you're not familiar with them, the concept is very simple. Usually you're a man, you're a guy, you're a dude. You go into these places, you pay a certain fee, and you are able to have phone conversations with women during a certain set time, right? Like an hour or like half an hour or whatever. And if the conversation goes well, you can meet them in real life or take them on a date or, I don't know, you know, do other kind of stuff. A bunch of other kura, sort of entertainment, sprouted after that. You have imekura, for example. Nowadays, the kura naming pattern evolved beyond the adult industry because you can find it in those places called purikura, which is just like those photo booth kind of thing that you can find in Japan. The game also prominently features cabarets, which are those places where you can go and have drinks with women and see some shows and drink alcohol and whatnot. And They're basically the ancestors of the kyabakura that you have nowadays. Cabarets are the places you had before they realized that none of the clients cared about the shows or the decorations or the sofas or anything. They're just here for the hostesses. They're just here for the women, right? So they refined the formula, they made kyabakura, and now you just pay to see the hostesses. You can even ask for one in particular, but it will be more expensive. I will come back on this later, but Yakuza 0 has a mini game where you act as the manager of a kyabakura, and it's really fun. I really liked it. The game has two protagonists, Kiryu and Majima, and they communicate using pagers because you didn't have smartphones back in the 80s. You don't have nightclubs, but you have disco, which is basically the 80s version of the nightclubs. To summarize, Yakuza 0 is a pristine recreation of the 80s in Japan, and it really shows. The only criticism that I've seen online is about the NPCs, and it's not something that I've noticed myself, but apparently their fashion is not really reminiscent of the 80s, and they tend to portray more modern fashion trends. Now allow me to talk about the combat and the gameplay of the game. You control this guy called Kiryu during some chapters, and you control Majima during the other chapters, and both of them don't have only one, but three different fighting styles, and you can even unlock a fourth secret one if you complete some side activities toward the end of the game. I could not really get a hang of the combat system at first. I didn't really know when you were supposed to switch from one fighting style to another. I was just using Brawler most of the time. The first boss of the game is this guy called Kuze. He's like a lieutenant of the Dojima family, which is a subsidiary of the Tojo clan that the game prominently features. I think he's supposed to act as a skill check for the newcomers in the series because he just feels pretty hard for that point in the game, which is pretty early on. And until you meet him, the only guys you had to fight were those lackeys of the Dojima family that are basically punching bags. Like, they don't really punch back very often, so I had no reason to learn how to parry or sidestep until I met Kuze. And now you're facing this super jacked ex-boxer old dude with a bunch of different techniques, and if you don't do so much as memorizing his patterns a little bit, he feels really challenging. But all things considered though, I'm kind of glad that they put Kuze so early on in the game because it forced me to understand the gameplay and how the combat works a little bit better. You wanna go take a swim? I think you also want to go take a swim. One thing that I want to mention though is that Kuze being jacked makes sense, right? He's an ex-boxer and it's implied that he still takes care of his body. So I'm cool with that. But what makes a bit less sense to me is the fact that the other two lieutenants of the Dojima family are super shredded too. Like, they're huge, and it's just not the vibe they give off initially. Like, Awano, anytime you see him, is like sitting super comfortably on his back. He looks like he has a little bit of extra fat under his purple vest. And the other guy, I think his name was Shibusawa, he's introduced as this more slick, genius Yakuza that doesn't really punch his way through, but is more about outsmarting his enemies, right? You can tell because he has glasses. But it doesn't matter with Yakuza, and this is really symptomatic of the Yakuza series as a whole. It's the fact that it doesn't really matter who you're facing, or it doesn't even matter what situation you're in. At the end of the day, you're going to have to exchange punches with the other guy. And if he doesn't look like the kind of guy who can fight, he can. He needs to, because that's just the way you solve problems in Yakuza. There's no other way. Violence, ladies and gentlemen, this is the only way that you can solve problems in real life. Everyone knows that. There's no denying that the writers used a bunch of narrative shortcuts to solve your problems, but I mean, you can't really blame them. It's a fact that in this game you don't really spend more than 5 minutes without fighting someone, and it's kind of fun. You see this man? This is a Yakuza. You can tell by his absolutely ridiculous vest. And if I push him, he's gonna want to fight me. There we go. Wait, where did they come from? He was alone a moment ago. I think it's probably an interaction to do with that car here. There we go. But never mind that. Substories, let's talk about those for a minute. In this game you have no less than 100 substories, with intentional numbering issues preserved from the Japanese version of the game that the developers left as a sort of Easter egg. These substories act as the side quest of the game, and they're either really funny, absolutely ridiculous, or both. There's a bunch of substories that I liked, and I could mention a few. For example, there is Passport to Pizza, which is a substory about Kiryu trying to help an illegal foreigner in Japan trying to get a visa. And her accent makes it sound like she's saying pizza, which is what Kiryu ends up bringing her. There's another one called How to Train Your Dominatrix, and it's basically about Kiryu trying to help this dominatrix learn how to fulfill her role better. Let's just put it this way. There is another sub-story that I really liked called Disciple of New Order, and it's basically about this really suspicious religious movement called Munan Shohebt Onast. I don't know if I'm saying this right, but it's basically the Yakuza 0 version of that religious cult that existed in Japan in 1987 called Oum Shinrikyo. And finally, you have this other sub-story called A Taxing Issue, where it's sort of implied that Majima is responsible for the 8% consumption tax of Japan. Special mention to that sub-story involving a fortune teller that apparently correctly predicts major events that happen in the Yakuza series. This is something I googled and I shouldn't have because I think it was just a bunch of major spoilers. So me. Yet another sub-story involves the cameo appearance of Shinji Tanaka, which is a pretty major character of Yakuza 1. And you also have one that features a 12-year-old Ryuji Goda, who grows up to be the main antagonist of Yakuza 2. Yakuza 0 has a bunch of mini-games. One of those is called UFO Catcher, and it's just a crane machine minigame. But I really despised it because it's just really slow and it takes forever to catch something, and it becomes even slower in Yakuza 1. There are a lot of gambling games. You have, the classic poker, you have blackjack, you have a bunch of gambling games that you find in Japan and China, and gambling games were never my thing to begin with, so I didn't spend too much time on them. There is another mini game called Catfights, and, if you compare it to the others, it has a certain visual appeal, but it's just another gambling game, so I didn't spend too much time on that either. You have batting centers, which are very famous in Japan, but I massively suck at this minigame, so I also didn't play it that much. Pocket Circuit was nice, but you know, I didn't really have the time to sit down and learn how all of the car components were affecting the performances in the race, so I shamefully used a guide so I could complete all of the sub-stories related to that one minigame. You also have bowling, darts, and pool, which I thought were pretty well implemented. Like, it feels like there could be some sort of like knowledge transfer between the game in real life and the minigame in Yakuza 0. Like, if you're good at darts, I think you could be good at darts in Yakuza 0 as well. If it strikes your fancy, there's also Mahjong in this game, as I've said before, and I actually used to play Mahjong when I was living in my Osaka University dormitory, but I was never good, and it's a huge time sink, so I didn't really play that much. A minigame that I played a lot more often, however, is the karaoke one. And you know, it seems pretty obvious to have karaoke in a game set in Japan, but a fun fact is that the director, Ryosuke Hori, had to fight in order to have karaoke in this game because his colleagues initially thought that it didn't really fit the vibe. It wasn't really Yakuza-like. And it turns out he was right, because one of the songs in the karaoke minigame called Baka Mitai just exploded online and became a really famous meme. Now the disco minigame, oh my god. You can actually see it on my screen over here, but it made me feel every emotion imaginable, because there are sub-stories associated with this minigame. It makes you go against like other dancers at the disco, and the first two are fine, like you can beat them pretty easily. But the third one, it's freaking impossible, and I've tried maybe 100 times to beat his ass, but I had to give up. My skills were lacking in this specific case. I just couldn't do it. The song that plays when you fight this guy is just the same, and I like it. It's a very catchy song, but after the millionth time that you listen to it, it gets a little bit tiring. I don't know why I'm doing this. There he is. This motherfucker. I'm only doing this to illustrate my words in the video, by the way. If it was up to me, I would not be trying this ever again, but I realized I had no footage of this, so I kinda need to at least try once more. Here we go. Now, there are two schools of thoughts. Some people think you should just focus on hitting all the notes and don't worry about the steps. Some people think you should get as much steps as you want. Nice. So far it's not that bad, but he's gonna catch up immediately. Did he fail? Am I winning again? This is weird. Oh, that's the part where I always fail. Wait, did I win? Oh my god, I won! Wait, what the fuck? I wanted footage where I was losing my mind over this this sub-story, and I just won. I can't use that footage now. I've already filmed the video where I talk about how impossible this is, and I just did it. After like a month of not playing the game. Suck it. I won't be nice to him. The worst thing is that it's not even the worst opponent that you're going to face in the disco minigame. There is another NPC in the game that you can face in the disco minigame, and his name is Miracle Johnson. I'm going to let you guess which person this is referencing, but he's even stronger at the disco minigame. I thought it was impossible to beat him up until I looked up online, and I noticed that you can absolutely beat him. I just really suck at this minigame apparently, but fortunately the rewards are the same whether you beat him or not, so thank There are two other pretty major minigames that I should mention, and one of them is the Cabaret Club. I mentioned this before, but essentially you act as the manager of a kyabakura, and it's a really fun minigame that goes throughout the entire Yakuza 0 game, where you can recruit different hostesses, you can level them up, you can change their makeup and their clothes so that they can match the guest preferences better. It's a really fun and hectic gameplay. I really liked it, and I was really happy to see it back in Yakuza 2. It features 30 AV actresses that I've never heard of, just like the fan-voted most popular AV actresses, with the top 5 being the highest tier hostesses that you get to recruit in the minigame. I know she looks old and all that, but she's actually a really good hostess, trust me. One of the best, actually. See? They always want to extend their session with her. Very scary eyes. The other one is a real estate management minigame, and I thought it was okay. Definitely not as fun as the Cabaret Club's minigame, because most of the time you're just waiting for the money to be collected before you can jump back into the management aspect of the game. To finish this video, I want to talk about the story of the game a little bit, and from this point onward it's going to be, spoilers all around. So if you haven't played the game, I suggest you skip to the end of the video. According to my research, Sega deliberately made Young Kiryu a loose cannon hothead, I'm quoting, to surprise the longtime fans of the series who are more used to like a calmer, more serious version of the character. And as a newcomer into the Yakuza series, it was really funny for me to read because playing the game, I thought he was the most stoic protagonist ever. And now you're telling me that he's supposed to be even more stoic in Yakuza 1 and 2? How is it possible? He's more stoic, I checked. Another character that I want to mention is Kuze. I talked about him as being the first boss of the game, but actually, you end up fighting this guy a total of 4 times in this game. 4 times. And he's not like specifically more difficult in the second, third, and fourth time. It's just kind of the same guy. And, I can get behind Kuze wanting his revenge on Kiryu by fighting him a second time, and he even brought a weapon this time around so he could have the upper hand, but the third and fourth time, I was like, what are you doing, dude? Like, the first few fights weren't exactly close. Kiryu was not at the brink of death after fighting him. It was pretty one-sided. So, it was really starting to affect the character credibility for me. Thankfully, though, I think that hatred transformed into some form of respect for Kiryu after the last fight, and I think he even tried to warn him about something that was to come. Anyway, Kiryu was a fine protagonist, he's a straight arrow, he respects his elders, and he has principles, so it's really easy to vouch for him. My only complaint is that he's just maybe a little bit too perfect. Like, it doesn't really have flaws that one could relate with, apart from him being super stoic. The story of Yakuza 0 is him basically John Wicking the entire Tojo clan so that he can save Makimura Makoto, the owner of the Empty Lot. The other protagonist is Majima, and I really love that character. It's hard to get a read on him initially because he shows so many different personalities throughout the game. Like, he can be this very distinguished cabaret manager, and he can also be this very rough Yakuza character. And some other times he can be this stand-up character with a slight hero complex that's trying to save everyone they come across. Anyway, the point is he has many layers and it's really hard to predict his next action. And it makes the story all the more interesting. I would say, however, that the game mainly paints him as a good dude, He spends most of his time trying to save Makimura Makoto from life or death situation at the risk of his own life. So that's pretty cool of him. He's a pretty cool character, and that's why I had a hard time accepting his ending, because toward the end, I really had a hard time understanding his actions. Essentially, he decides to become this crazy dude that enjoys life to the fullest and wears this like really weird vest. And it's implied that this transformation is a kind of conscious coping mechanism inspired by three guys he met throughout the game. You have Nishitani, this like really thrill-seeking Yakuza. You have Lee, this really kind, protective dude. And then you have Sagawa, the lieutenant from the Omi Alliance, who inspired Majima with his tenacity and dedication to his task. His new personality is supposed to be an amalgamation of the people he encountered, but to me it really looks like he's just another version of Nishitani. He even fights the same way with like one dagger and jumping around like a crazy dude. I think I would have accepted this transformation a little bit better if it was gradual throughout the game and not very sudden at the very last scene of the game, or if some sort of like traumatic event broke his spirit just before that happened. But I don't know, it just happened kind of like suddenly, and I was left a little bit surprised and perplexed about this sudden change. Additionally, I think Majima patching up with Sagawa at the end of the game just came out of nowhere as well, because Sagawa wasn't asked to him the entire game. Like, he wasn't nice to him at all, and he treated him like a prisoner, constantly reminding him that he was under surveillance. So, what the fuck? Like, when did they become buddies? Majima's newfound loyalty for Shimano also feels really misplaced, because Shimano is the guy responsible for him getting tortured for a year and him missing an eye. So, I get Majima wanting to get back into the Tojo clan, but why did it have to be alongside Shimano? I didn't really understand that part. The consensus online seems to be that newcomers like me are a bit perplexed by Majima's ending, but veterans are fine, because if anything, they're more used to Majima being a crazy guy, instead of this very nuanced version of him we get to see in Yakuza 0. I think at the end of the day, the writers needed the characters to be who they were supposed to be for the start of Yakuza 1, and at the start of Yakuza 1, Majima is already crazy. So, I don't know, I guess it needed to happen somehow. Apart from these few points, Yakuza 0's plotline is very solid, very interesting, and I would recommend anyone to play the game. So that's my take on Yakuza 0, a game that really nails the atmosphere of the 1980s Japan, delivers unforgettable characters, and also packs it more side content that most modern games dare. Although I do think the game missed its chance to better introduce the relationship between Kiryu and Majima, I still really enjoyed my time with it. But that's just how I felt about it. What about you? Did you love Yakuza 0 as much as I did? Or did some parts not work for you? Let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. See you next time. Sometimes he's like the really rough Yakuza character, and other times he's like this really like. You wanna be part of the video? Come on, you talk. What did you think about Yakuza 0? She didn't like it.